Hi, I'm Marcus Coward, and this is Wake Up New Bedford, and I'm here with Elliot Talley.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, in part one, we talked a lot about how Elliot ended up at this point as the chair of the Student Advisory Council, how he sits on the school committee, and several other positions that kind of overlap, but have this general theme of advocacy and political involvement, essentially. And so, in that realm, you brought up how you do and have written legislation. Mm-hmm. Okay. Talk a little bit about that, because the common person has not and don't even know what that even means. Okay. Yeah. So maybe define what legislation is and talk about the process of writing it and maybe some challenges that come with it.
Yeah, that's a good question. So legislation is what it becomes a bill, right? It's what your laws are. They start off as a piece of legislation. So that's just you're writing out what you want to happen on that piece of paper. You're getting it through committees and getting it voted on, then it becomes a law. So writing that potential law is difficult because there's a lot of legal jargon that sometimes you have to know, hitherto, thereof,
Sure.
all those words that I love using it in legislation because it makes me feel cool.
Yeah.
But it does take a little bit of work. Part of what you do is you look at legislation of similar nature, right? So the legislation that I helped write was about student representative voting rights. That already exists in the state of Maryland. So I looked at the law that established that in Maryland and used a lot of the same wording. I also looked at the current law on the books that has a student on the Student Advisory Council and looked at how we could amend that. And so I said, lines 1 through 3 shall be stricken in its entirety, and I will include such and such. And so that's kind of how you write the law. You use other former laws to help you out, and then you bring that forth to the piece of legislation that you are filing. So the process of that we at least had to follow, it's a little different for each person, but generally it's the process I followed. I found a legislator who wanted to support it out in Western Mass. I didn't find it, my friend Joey did. And he submitted it to her. She said, yes, that's okay. As long as you fight for it, it'll be in. And so it gets filed. Then legislators can sign on to the bill or co-sponsor, which just means they support it, their name will be on the bill, right? And so we had a lot of co-sponsors actually from both parties. So it wasn't a partisan bill, and then of course our state senator here, Mark Montigny, supported it as well, which is amazing. Wonderful. Yeah. So that's the co-sponsorship period. Then it gets assigned to a committee, which is just a group in the State House that is focused on a specific type of legislation. So the Education Committee took on our bill. They look at it, they vote on it, they amend it, however, and then they send it to the full House. And the House votes on it, Senate votes on it, Governor signs it, such and such. How ours worked out is we made it to committee. We actually testified, so I testified in front of the committee and said, here's why you should support the bill. I get 2 minutes.
Sure.
And what they did was they stripped the important parts of the bill, but passed it. So it was kind of a nice way of saying no to us.
Yeah.
But I can technically, legally say my bill passed because it did, but they stripped the important part from it. And so that, I consider that a fail in my book. And so that's just, we'll have to do more work again. So the association, although I have since left it, the Association of Student Representatives that I spoke about in part 1, they have now refiled that bill.
And this bill was having to do with what in particular?
Allowing student representatives on school committees to vote on matters before that school committee.
And so why do you think there is pushback on that? Did it have to go back to one of the biggest challenges you brought up in part 1 with them just not taking young people seriously?
Yes, exactly that. When I spoke to people, that's what they said. They said kids shouldn't be voting, kids deserve a say, but they kind of want us to just talk and then go away. And I've noticed that a lot because I tried to get the school committee to pass a resolution to show that they support this, and that failed. And their reasoning was, we don't think that we think that you're great, but a kid having a vote is just not going to work. Because they're like, what if there's a bad apple in your seat? And I do agree, there could be someone that isn't ready who takes over my job at some point, right? But that's politics. There are many unqualified politicians who can not only vote, but some of them are in certain capacities where they can do more than just vote on legislation. And they're in, and we just have to wait to push them out of office, and a lot of times they do. And so that's just how politics works. It's no different with students. And with students, for me to stay in my job, I have to have a C average or better, and I have to have 85% attendance or better, and no out-of-school suspensions, basically. So I have to follow a couple of rules to be allowed to stay in my post. And I still have term limits. I'm term limited at 3 terms. I went all the way up to my term limit. But I mean, there are still rules and regulations in place. More so than those who run for real office. So if you run for school committee, you pretty much just have to be 18 and live in New Bedford.
Exactly.
Here I have to live in New Bedford, be of school age, but also C's or better.
And follow those guidelines.
I have to be on track to graduate with good attendance, right? So there are a lot of more guidelines for me than for anybody else that were to run.
Sure. And especially because these policies are going to be affecting the students the most.
Yes.
It would make sense for you guys to have more of a say in if it should pass or not.
Exactly what I said.
Sure. No, and I'm all for student empowerment. I mean, sure, I'm 26, but I mean, I'm a student at BCC, but in a lot of ways, I'm still young, even though somebody who's 13 is going to be like, you're close to 30? But we have such an important voice, and we want to use it in a lot of ways and intend to, and that's the last thing we need is old people telling us that our voice doesn't matter.
Right? I agree. It's definitely a lot. The pushback can be annoying at times because it's not like I'm trying to get a vote on some, at the Department of Defense, I decide whether we go to war or not. It's nothing like that. I would like a vote on what is going to happen to the students I represent. And my bill would make it so that there were 2 representatives on every committee. That is not enough to water down the adults on the committee because our school committee, I'm pretty sure we have 7 members. If 2 of us voted against the 7 of them, that wouldn't change anything.
Yes, exactly.
Right, and so in most committees, and most committees are more than 3 people, so us 2 would not affect anything. The time that there was an issue in Maryland, at least, was because the vote was really close and the student representative broke that closeness. And it went the student's way. And then they tried to sue. And guess what? The Supreme Court said, no, this is fully legal. And when I was actually discussing having the vote, the mayor said that would be undemocratic because everyone else is elected by the people, and that came to me a lot. But I said, there are many times where you'll have stakeholders who get a big say in that, right? And I do agree, the citizens do deserve a big part in education, and they should, of course, be having a say in how their kids are educated. But so should the students. The students here are the stakeholders of education. It makes perfect sense that we have that right. And in Maryland, they argued the same thing. And the Maryland Supreme Court said, you guys are wrong, the student representatives can vote, this law will stand. And so it is the law of the land in Maryland. And I used that to back my claim up, and it didn't work.
And so you're a young leader in the community, okay? And that's a very important title, but that's also, I'm feeling like a rare one, maybe in New Bedford, that in so many different eras that these movements were being led by the young people. But right now I'm looking around and there's not as many young people getting involved in different movements or politically and so why do you think that is, or do you disagree, or do you see that, and what advice could you give to other young people in order for them to get involved and why they should?
I fully see what you mean and I agree with you. I think it is difficult to get involved in this work. I can say I definitely do not see as many leaders these days as you may have seen in previous years, and I'd like to see more. There are a couple others in New Bedford that are doing some of the similar work to me, but I'd like to see more, right?
Absolutely.
And what I do at some point shouldn't be as rare as it is at this time. Part of it is, of course, young people feeling they don't have the power. And a lot of young people, when I talk to them, like, well, where were you when you could have done this? I'm like, well, I don't get a say, or that's not my problem. So I think the 2 things are that, 1, your voice does matter, and 2, it is your problem because you're taking over this world. You guys are already becoming the leaders of this world. It will be your problem in about 5 years. So it's time to take ownership now. And so if those students really realize that this does affect you and that you have a voice, that will work. We are seeing a lot of college protests now with certain things that are happening nowadays, and so we are seeing some young people stand up. But I was at a protest a couple last week, and I was the only person under the age of 18 there.
Yeah.
There were a couple college students, but it's hard to find these young people there. And so, I mean, I'd say part of it is finding the time, but I find the time.
You do,
right?
yes.
Right? And so when I do hear students say that, I'm like, you can find the time.
You have to prioritize it.
Exactly. It's just, it has to be a priority for you, standing up for what's right. But I think the two even bigger pieces to that are definitely, again, you have a voice, it works, and you know what? This is your problem. You have to take ownership.
And so, it might have been off camera, but you were mentioning that there's so many other student initiatives, around the country that are happening. Would you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, as I would say, there's the National Student Board Member Association. So that's all the student board members across the country. So Massachusetts is quite unique, where we have a student on every student advisory council, on every school committee. Maryland has a similar one. And then California, the state board, they have a student. So there are students on boards of education throughout the country. Not quite similarly to here. So a lot of the work that we do is, trying to make it more uniform. Every state should have at least one student on the State Board of Education and students on their school committees. So that's kind of the work we do, around. I can say in Massachusetts that student leadership movement is bigger because we have these roles. So when I look at these students in different regions that are doing the work of their students, like Duxbury. I love Duxbury because they were in my region one year, and all their students are very kind, but also they've done a lot of work. Their student leaders, one of their student leaders is now leading the Southeast region for another student council association. So a lot of students are doing good work, but they're doing work with music. They have a really good music program in Duxbury, and the students are part of that, pushing for that. That's what I'm doing here too. I've been pushing for improving the music program, and we have new leadership in that department, and we are getting work done.
Good.
And it's going well. So yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of the work is, like you said, using your voice and realizing it's your problem, but it's really advocating.
Yes.
Advocating for yourself and for your fellow peers to say, this is what we want, and we're going to take action as to how to get it.
Yeah, I agree that it's definitely talking about, students need to know that how you advocate. And when I do workshops on how you advocate for people, part of it is listening, a lot of listening, because you come in with all these views and then people are like, no, we want this. And if people want something else, then you have to at least take that into account. And if you can't, then you need to explain to all those people why you don't agree with, the 70% of students who are saying this one thing. And so part of that is that teaching these students, and then that your voice matters and that you have to say what's right no matter what. And that can be difficult for students. Even sometimes I get a little nervous, but you gotta do what you gotta do.
And knowing the facts, like you mentioned before, that you have this big binder of that you're going to pass on to Mark, but it's because you don't want to say anything that's not backed by fact.
Exactly.
And so it's being informed. And a lot of young kids, I mean, we have the intelligence, but are we prioritizing the important things to be informed? Yeah.
Exactly. I agree with that. And there are a lot of times where people let their emotions take charge. Now, I very much dislike the phrase facts over feelings, because empathy should be something that we all focus on. But what I will say is that facts should be a huge part of your argument. And although you may be passionate about it, sometimes people let that passion get in the way of the facts. That's when that becomes an issue. And so I've been passionate about issues. And so instead of just like rambling on, I look at either my binder or I do a little bit of research, and I'm like, all right, here's the facts. Now let me present it. The biggest one is financial literacy. March is Financial Literacy Month, so that's why I'm happy to talk about that. And I talked about it last year, and I actually reached out to a financial literacy educator in Swampscott who also does advocacy, and she sent me a bunch of resources to kind of understand how important financial literacy is for students, and I was able to present that data, say, hey, we need expanded access to these classes as students, and we got it. So,
Okay, really?
Yeah.
So New Bedford High has financial literacy classes or something?
We've always had them, but we haven't been able to offer too many of them. We've had only a couple each semester, but now we've had it. We have these new blocks called WIN, which stands for What I Need, which is, to explain it, it's sort of like a study hall, but legally we can't do those, so Massachusetts, we're not having study halls. It is a chance for enrichment of learning.
Sure.
So you can choose to do a What I Need on your AP class, so you can get extra time to get help and get that work done. But I also advocated for having a financial literacy WIN class. And so now that exists, so much more students have access to that, and so that's more classes. So we've expanded, and every quarter you get a new WIN. So that's 4 new quarters where we can have a financial literacy class. So that's a step in the right direction. There's more work to be done, but seeing that step made me very happy.
Absolutely. You know, it's always great to see progress and get a success under your belt.
Yeah.
And so we were also briefly talking off camera about the complicated problem of parent involvement in the school.
Yes.
So from your perspective, have you had any ideas as to how to encourage parent involvement?
It definitely does need to be encouraged. I will say, as I told you off camera, that we have school councils for parents, and they get elected or appointed to those seats, and then they don't have meetings because they're all busy. And I think some of it is they can make the time if they prioritize it, right? And so, because the meetings, it's not like the meeting times have changed, when they're going to be when you sign up, right? So it's like, it has to be a priority. And part of it is really showing parents you do have a say. Because as I told you, that parents sometimes are like, well, I don't have a say in my kid's education. That's all on their teachers or whatever. But it's like, you do have a say. Here are these avenues. I can say a lot of parents don't even know that school councils are a thing. So part of encouraging parent involvement is showing them, here's how you can get involved, here's what the school committee does, you can vote for them, here's the school council, you can be on it, you can advise the principals of these schools on how they can best support the parents and those students of said parents, right? So part of it is that education piece of really teaching these parents, you have a say, here's how you can get your say, use it, but then also it is just making parents really want to do it. A lot of parents want what's best for their kids. And so parents need to realize that doing what's best with your kids means getting really involved in your child's education and not just leaving it to the schools.
Yes.
So that messaging, and you have to be careful about how you message that, because you can't just tell parents you're not doing, that makes them upset. But really telling them you have the power, you need to be involved, that will hopefully get them involved.
And that this will help your student. This will help your child.
Yes.
I feel like parents will do anything for their kids, no one's denying that, but realizing that you showing up at the school and being more present there will positively affect your child.
Even showing up at school committee meetings and just sitting there looking at what we're looking at, the budget for next year, looking at our budget increases, looking at some of the things that we may be worried about. And then you can figure out, all right, what would I like to recommend? You can speak during public comment. You can speak. You get 3 minutes to just talk into a microphone.
Sure.
Use it. If you have something you want to talk about. A lot of parents do use that avenue, but not many parents even know much about the school committee. Some know it's there, don't know where they meet, when they meet, what they really talk about. And so part of that is, again, that education piece.
Sure. And so something that I'm not too educated on, but I'm trying to learn more about, are the student feelings towards SROs. Okay. Could you talk a little bit about that?
What I can say is that I haven't heard too many student comments on school resource officers, so it's hard for me to make a generalized statement.
Sure.
I can say school resource officers at times can be useful when you're in a community that sometimes doesn't trust the police. If you have a police officer in that building that is saying, you can trust me, but is showing that they can be trusted, that can be really helpful and that can translate to dealing with the police in real life, right? So if a school resource officer is in there talking to students, shaking hands, doing fist bumps, there's this school resource officer that is from New Jersey that I look at sometimes, and he's always doing dances with his students and he's fist bumping them. That's what you'd like to see in a school resource officer. And I know that some would say, well, that's not what they're there for. They're there to keep law and order, but that doesn't help. If they're just there to enforce rules and they're only present when there's something bad going on, they're only present to break up students or detain a student, that is not helpful at all, and that is only harmful, actually, to the relationship that students have to police. But if school resource officers really take the time to know the students, get to know them, I know my school resource officer by name, I shake his hand almost every day, he is very helpful, and I like seeing that.
Sure.
And so it's just other students should be getting that too. And if that's happening, then students will have an opinion, and generally a positive one.
Sure. And so they can be a positive, but students have to utilize them, and the SRO also has to make him or herself more available to the students, and also just be more friendly. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. But you want to say that, so would you say that they increase the feeling of safety in the school, or overall and I'm asking your personal opinion, that you would say that you'd feel just as safe if there weren't police officers in the school?
That's a wonderful question. So what I can say is a lot of the students don't realize we have a school resource officer. They do see the police car outside sometimes, but Officer Bland is in the building, and sometimes he's walking around. He has an office, and we all wrote him cards for his birthday and everything, and School Resource Officer Appreciation Day.
Sure.
But I haven't been able to develop an opinion on whether they make me feel safer or not, because there was a big movement against them in 2020 with the George Floyd incident. I can say that having somebody in school to keep us safe in these times is definitely useful. And I can say, I don't want to say that they're harmful. I can say they're probably not harmful to the students,
Sure.
but it's just how helpful can they be? I feel like they'd be more helpful, again, if they were really engaging with students, because if students trust the police and students will respect those police officers that are here to serve us, that is really useful.
That'd be amazing.
That would be useful, and that's useful for the community, the student body and the community.
Yeah.
And so part of it is what would make them really good for safety is not only being there to protect us if there's something going on, but also to build those relationships, because the thing is we have security officers at the school too. We have security that aren't, that don't carry the same things that police officers do, and they also break up fights and keep us safe. And so, and they actually, I have to say, the security at our school are doing a really good job at connecting to the students.
Great.
They, when they're walking students to class, they'll be like, do you have a pass? They're not just like, do you have a pass? You're getting detention. No, they're like, do you have a pass? You don't. I'm gonna walk you to class. We're gonna talk about this, and we'll be done. And they actually have developed really good bonds with these students that I really like to see. And if we could see school resource officers behave in that manner, then I'd say they would be really positive for our school.
Sure. And then just briefly, also on the realm of safety and just knowing your own personal feelings about the metal detectors, okay? And so you brought that up briefly at school committee, in that overall efficiency wasn't as bad as students would have thought, right? But that some students are still being selected to get their bag searched.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what would you say is the compromise there? What's the solution?
That's difficult, because when we came into this saying, let's get weapons detectors, the students and I were like, no. Now I can say I'm not as against them as I was, because I thought they were going to take a long time, because they think your laptop is a weapon. So you have to take your laptops out your bag, hand it to them, and if the laptop's too close to the detector, then it's going to go off anyways, right? And so I'd say that the solution, that would be hard to figure out. I would say, however, is that we did spend the money kind of quickly, and I would like to see if there are, even if they're more expensive, if there are weapons detectors that are more efficient in actually detecting weapons. Because I do not bring weapons to school, and I have had my stuff searched about every week since I've gotten into school, which is, it's fine, but it can get frustrating. And there have been times where we'll have 8 kids in a row all set it off because the passing of the laptops didn't go correctly, but they didn't fully figure that out. So all 8 of us are getting our stuff searched. There's only one person to search. Now that efficiency is gone. And we have less entrances open. So we used to have, the principal said a number that that I don't quite remember, but it was at least 40 entrances to the school we could use.
Wow. That's a lot.
But now it's 4, right? And so those changes definitely add to the efficiency issue, and part of it is staffing. So I would say getting the staff to open more lanes and having more weapons detectors, and getting weapons detectors that don't require you to, 1, take your laptop out, and that 2, detect something on you anyways, because they think something you have in your bag looks like a weapon, right? And so, because I mean, in New York City, right, if you go to New York and you go to Broadway, you go through, almost no one's getting, detected by those detectors because they must, and we have to figure that out because there are weapons detectors out there that do not think everything is a weapon and that aren't as difficult and don't think that a laptop is a weapon. So I think part of it is really spending the money to do this right.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And so we have a couple minutes left. Okay. So for someone who would be running for school committee, okay, what would be maybe 3 to 5 things you would ask them to focus on, maybe to make their platform or just issues that in the student's eyes would be really important?
I want to, one, say focusing on student voice, because I do have school committee members who I can easily go to and be like, I'm having this issue, please help me out, and they'll always be there for me, and they're wonderful. And that's really useful for the student rep, especially when they're new, to have that support, right? Like I had one of the school committee members who will be like, Elliot, do you have anything to say on this? And I'm like, in fact, I do. I was just too nervous to turn on my mic. That was when I first got elected. Now I'm not too nervous.
Not at all.
Yeah, right? But like when I first got elected, I was scared. In fact, I was very silent for the first couple months. But then I got into it. And part of it is having school committee members who have the backs of the students. And sometimes first.
Yeah.
Also, focusing on transparency. The school committee sometimes finds things out really late. I can say this school committee has been holding admin more account. Admin also hasn't been doing this as much, especially with the new superintendent. But admin would sometimes send things in really quickly, and it's just like, all right, you're voting now. And it's like, whoa, we're not ready. And the school committee would just like have to vote on it. Lately, the school committee would just we'll table it, say, you didn't give us enough time, we're going to table it to next meeting.
Good.
And now administration doesn't do that as much as we've had that turnover. When you look at, there was, and I'm not quite sure what the title of this was, but that security chief that people were calling the school warden, that came in really quickly, and not all the school committee's questions were answered. The school committee used their power to table that, and they kind of tabled it and tabled it and tabled it, and then the superintendent that was pushing it left the district, and so it just kind of fell flat. Right? And so focusing on making sure that admin is telling you everything they can, and being really transparent with what's going on and what they're telling their students. So those are the 2 biggest things I'd say, and just listening is big. Listening to your colleagues on the committee, but listening to the students, listening to parents, and listening to other stakeholders, and realizing that the stakeholders have a stake as well. And by that, I mean organizations, educational organizations that either help advocate or that help give resources to schools. So really being sure to listen to all stakeholders in the equation.
Good things to keep in mind for anyone who's going to run for school committee.
Yeah.
So, Elliot, that's the interview.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
I know you probably have like homework or something to do, but you are a very impressive young man, and I think you have a very bright future ahead of you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me.
No, it's been a pleasure. This has been Elliot Talley on Wake Up New Bedford. He is a New Bedford High senior, and we wish him the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Catch us in the next episode. Peace.